السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وعلى. Um, so let's start off with the presentation, inshallah. Zainab, it's you again?
Yeah.
Do you share the screen or?
No, I think I'll just read.
Okay.
Okay. Bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Today we'll be talking about Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu. His full name was Anas ibn Malik ibn Nadr ibn Damdam ibn Zayd ibn Haram ibn Jundub ibn Amir ibn Ghan, and he was from the tribe of Bani Adi ibn Najjar. He used to be called Khadim Rasulillah, the servant or the caretaker of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he used to take great pride in that name. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him the kunya of Abu Hamza. His mother's name was Sulaim bint Milhan. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Medina, Anas's mother took him to the Prophet and said, "O Messenger of Allah, there has not remained a man or a woman from the Ansar except that they have gifted you something, and I do not have anything to gift you except this son of mine. So take him and he will serve you for as long as you wish." Anas was 10 years old during this time, so he served the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the Prophet passed away. So he served and accompanied the Prophet for the next 10 years, through which he learned a lot about the Prophet's character, his social life, his family life, and his dealings with other people. So he narrates a lot of hadith about the Prophet's compassion and love and the way he treated other people. So he narrates the famous incident in which Anas narrates where the Prophet ﷺ sent him out to do something. And he sets out to do it and he sees other kids playing. So he starts playing with them, and then he turns around and the Prophet ﷺ was there, and he asked him, "Oh, Unais, did you go where I asked you to?" And Anas said, "I am going now." And then he said, "By Allah, I served the Prophet for 10 years, and he never once said to me, 'Why did you do this? And why didn't you do this?'" And he would advise Anas using like words of endearment, like he would call him Unais sometimes, and he would call him Ya Bunay. And because of how much time he spent with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would observe everything the Prophet did. So Abu Huraira said about Anas's prayer that I did not see anyone's prayer more similar to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam than Anas. For his battles, he didn't participate in Badr or Uhud because he was too young. He did participate in Bay'atul Ridwan. So once the Prophet ﷺ made dua for Anas, and he said, "O Allah, increase in his wealth and his children." And I got different variations for the last part. Some said, وأدخله الجنة. Some said بارك له, and some said اغفر له. So he became one of the wealthiest companions, and his garden would produce twice a year. And he had around 100 children and grandchildren. And Anas said, I have seen two, and I hope for the third. And after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, it said he stayed in Medina for some time, and then he moved to Al-Basra, and he taught the people there. And he was one of the last companions to pass away. And a lot of the tabi'een became tabi'een because they met Anas. And he was very keen on following the Prophet in his sayings and actions. He loved what the Prophet loved and disliked what the Prophet disliked. And it said that the 2 days he remembered most were the day he first met the Prophet and the day he saw him last. And he passed away, seems like most people said at the age of 103, but I read like 100 and 107 as well. And this was between 90 to 93 after Hijrah. And he passed away in Al-Basra. That's
Okay. Jazakallah khair. So Anas radiallahu anhu, he was, how old was he when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam arrived in Medina?
10.
He was 10. Right? So he was quite young. Some mention that actually the mother of Anas radiallahu anhu was mahram to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was in some, I forget exactly the details. She was the khala of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, either through rada'ah or something along those lines. And so you have those. The Prophet ﷺ frequented the house of Sulaym, and so the question may arise that why was there this informal relationship? It wasn't just because of Anas radiallahu anhu, but it was also because there seems to be a relationship of mahramiyah. And then the sister of Sulaym is Haram bint Milhan, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I'm not sure. I don't
Oh.
know. I didn't see that
If I'm not mistaken, Haram bint Milhan is the sister of Sulaym. You can double check that. And she was the one who would her grave is in Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken. She is the one that the Prophet told her about what was going to happen in the future, and she made dua that Allah make me from amongst those people, and she was made from that group of people. And so that was the sister of Sulaym as well. The story of, I guess it's somewhat unrelated, but you have Anas ibn Malik, his father passed away. I'm not exactly sure when, probably before Islam. But let's double check that. But then Sulaym, his mother, gets married to Abu Talha, and there's also an interesting story over there about the marriage of Sulaym to Abu Talha Ansari. He essentially became Muslim to, if I'm not mistaken, the story goes that he became Muslim to one of the motivating factors of him becoming Muslim was marrying Sulaym. And you have the many stories of Sulaym as well that are mentioned as well. So it's a little bit more details, but that was good. Jazakallah khair. I created an assignment on Google Classroom. So once you've done your individual, once you're done with all of your work, so basically when you're done with all of your presentations, so for Zainab, that's going to be 3 presentations. For everyone else, that would be 2. Then just put your notes, if you could put your notes in one document, or however, if it's multiple documents, but just upload that to the assignment and submit that. I put the due date for November 4th, which is the date of the last presentation. So just whenever you're done, just do that, and then I'll look through that and grade that, inshallah.
Okay.
Just trying to, we just got Google Classroom working, but trying to integrate it a little bit more. I'll try to I'll try to upload some of the resources that I shared earlier on the WhatsApp group onto Google Classroom, so it's in one centralized location, I guess. And then yeah, we'll go from there. I'm still not added to, I think I'm not on Sycamore for you guys. So I will, your grades won't be necessarily updated on Sycamore, but they should be on Google Classroom. Okay. With that, we should get started, inshallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala. أبواب الإيمان عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. We finished the section on the hereafter in the end of the previous, right before what we started was about Sifati, I think it was at Qiyamah or something along those lines. And then we had Sifatul Jannah and Sifatul Jahannam. And now we are on Abwabul Iman an Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abwabul Iman, Kitabul Iman in Sahih Muslim is one of the most comprehensive. So when you get to that point, when you get to Sahih Muslim, then you'll cover that in more detail with Shaykh Farhan. But you have, there's a couple things to discuss when covering this. You have Iman and Islam. What is the relationship between the two? Is there a difference between the two, linguistically and technically? What are their meanings? And so Islam comes from Aslama Yuslimu, Islaman, which means to submit, al-inqiyad. And then you have Amana Yu'minu, Imanan, which means tasdeeq, to believe. And so that's the linguistic definition of Iman and Islam. Technically speaking, they can be used interchangeably, and they can be used distinctly, in distinct meanings, right? And so depending on the context, they may be used synonymously or they may be used distinctly. And generally speaking, if two, you have this principle, either اجتمعا تفرقا وإذا افترقا تجمعا, something along those lines, that when you have two similar words that are sometimes used synonymously, when they're used together, then their meanings are going to be distinct. But when they're used separately, then they will have the same meaning. And so that's not across, and that you can't say, that's not necessarily an absolute rule, but that's a general rule that you can go by. And so Islam would be the outward actions, and Iman would be the beliefs. Then you have the discussion on the definition of Iman. Is Iman simply tasdeeq, or is there multiple parts to it? Is it basit or murakkab? Basit means, is it simple? Does it not? Is it made up of only one part, or are there multiple parts to it? Is it murakkab? And so, Iman is, you have the famous ikhtilaf that Iman is either tasdeeq, those say that it's Iman is tasdeeq, and then the other side says that Iman is made up of three parts: tasdeeq bil lisan, iqrar bil lisan. Sorry, tasdeeq. You have iqrar bil lisan, you have amal bil arkan, and tasdeeq bil janan, tasdeeq bil qalb. Right. So belief with the heart, attesting with the tongue, and acting with the limbs. And the muhaqqiqeen, from later scholars, they reconcile between these two positions, and they say that, in fact, this ikhtilaf is a ikhtilaf lughawi, or lafzi, sorry, ikhtilaf lafzi. Practically speaking, it doesn't really make much of a difference, because the positions held are essentially the same. And those that say Iman is tasdeeq, they differentiate Iman into two categories: that base level of Iman that will save you from being in the hellfire for eternity, and then that level of Iman that will enter you into Jannah earlier. And so that base level of Iman is simply tasdeeq, and iqrar and amal are that higher level of Iman that will allow someone to enter Jannah earlier. And then you have the whole discussion of, does Iman decrease and increase? And it stems from this idea that those that say that Iman is made up of these three parts, they will say that Iman increases and decreases because actions increase and decrease. Sometimes people will do more, sometimes people will do less. And you have the many proofs for that in the Quran, to say that Iman increases and decreases. The other side who say that Iman is simply tasdeeq, they say that this base level of Iman that will save you from entering eternity in hellfire, that base level of Iman will never increase and decrease. But that second level, the second type of Iman, which will enter you into Jannah earlier, that will increase and decrease. And so again, it ends up being a khilaf lafzi, a semantic difference. And this is according to the later muhaqqiqeen. You also have a longer discussion of takfir of a mulhid, that when does someone leave the fold of Islam? And you have, when you say something is kufr, you have two types of kufr. You have kufrun duna kufrin, which is actions of disbelief, which are major sins, but they don't, it's not kharij anil millah, it doesn't remove you from the fold of Islam, but it is an act of kufr. And then you have those things that are disbelief, and they remove you from the fold of Islam. And so that distinction needs to be made. And leaving Islam is something that is just as leaving Islam is something that is not taken lightly, and doing takfir of something is not something that is taken lightly. And then finally you have the mas'ala of qadr, of divine decree, which comes as well. And so this is the confusion arises when it comes to the knowledge, when people confuse the knowledge of Allah with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing something doesn't mean that He's not giving you, it doesn't mean that you do not have free will. And Allah, the decree is of two types. One is something that is set in stone. Those are things that you have no control over. Where you're going to be born, where you, who your parents are, different things like that, which are set in stone. And then you have some decree which is more like, these are the options that he has. If he does this, this will be the result. If he does this, this will be the result. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what your choice is going to be, but it's written in the decree as in that way. And so some different divided up in that way. And there's a more detailed discussion regarding that when you get to Sahih Muslim. Hopefully that will be discussed in more detail. And so with that, we go into the first chapter, which is Babu ma ja'a umirtu an uqatila an-nas hatta yaqulu la ilaha illallah. One thing to note about this hadith is this hadith is related to the discussion of when to stop fighting. You have hatta over here, hatta yaqulu la ilaha illallah. Hatta is for ghaya. So this is telling you when fighting ends. And this is not by any means, this is not telling you when fighting starts, it's telling you when fighting ends. And so this may be a hadith that some may use to claim that Islam was spread by the sword and so on and so forth. But that's a complete misunderstanding because of the hatta is telling you that this is the extent, this is the ghaya of where fighting stops. And with that, let's get started. Afraz, are you able to read?
Sheikh, I'm not in the first part. I'm headed over to the class right now.
Okay. Zainab, why don't you get us started?
بسم الله. وبالسند المتصل منا إلى الإمام الهمام الحافظ أبي عيسى محمد بن عيسى محمد ابن أبي عيسى
أبي عيسى محمد بن عيسى بن ثورة الترمذي.
محمد بن عيسى أبي عيسى محمد بن عيسى بن ثورة الترمذي رحمه الله تعالى ومتعنا بعلومه وبركاته آمين. وبه قال حدثنا هناد.
I'm going to add one more thing to that intro, just so it will help us. So let's see how it works. المتوفى سنة 79 و200 للهجرة. So just mentioning his death date, so that way when if we repeat it every class, we'll eventually memorize it.
Can you say it again, Sheikh?
So just the death date of when he passed away, because these are facts that we should know, right? So المتوفى سنة 79 و200 للهجرة. So and then رحمه الله تعالى ومتعنا بعلومه وبركاته. So 279. So we'll try to have that in. I came across someone who was reading in one of my classes, and he would do that, and I thought that was a good idea. So inshallah, we'll try to do that. Go ahead. Continue.
وبه قال حدثنا هناد قال حدثنا أبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله فإذا قالوها عصموا مني دماءهم وأموالهم إلا بحقها وحسابهم على الله. وفي الباب عن جابر وأبي سعيد وابن عمر رضي الله عنهم. هذا حديث صحيح.
Right? وحسابهم على الله means that we judge based on what's apparent, what they're expressing outwardly. We're not responsible for what they're concealing. If they're just accepting Islam for protection or for some other motivation, then that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Continue.
وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا الليث عن عقيل عن الزهري قال أخبرني عبيد الله بن عبد الله بن عتبة بن مسعود عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال لما توفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم واستخلف أبو بكر بعده كفر من كفر من العرب فقال عمر بن الخطاب لأبي بكر كيف تقاتل الناس وقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله ومن قال لا إله إلا الله عصم مني ماله ونفسه إلا بحقه وحسابهم على الله. فقال أبو بكر رضي الله عنه والله لأقاتلن من فرق بين الصلاة والزكاة فإن الزكاة حق المال والله لو منعوني عقالا كانوا يؤدونه إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لقاتلتهم على منعه. فقال عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه فوالله ما هو إلا أن رأيت أن الله قد شرح صدر أبي بكر للقتال فعرفت أنه الحق. هذا حديث حسن صحيح. وهكذا روى شعيب بن أبي حمزة عن الزهري عن عبيد الله بن عبد الله بن عتبة عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه. وروى عمران القطان هذا الحديث عن معمر عن الزهري عن أنس بن مالك عن أبي بكر رضي الله عنهما وهو حديث خطأ وقد خولف عمران في روايته عن معمر.
Okay, so over here you have the story of the beginning of the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And so Umar radiallahu anhu is initially objects, right? Because he thinks that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is fighting them because he's considering them murtad. And so over here in the footnote, he talks about under kafara man kafara min al-Arab. He says, أصحاب الردة كانوا صنفين. صنف ارتدوا عن الدين وكانوا طائفتين إحداهما أصحاب مسيلمة والأسود الذين آمنوا بنبوتهما والأخرى طائفة ارتدوا عن الإسلام وعادوا إلى ما كانوا عليه في الجاهلية واتفقت الصحابة على قتالهم وسبيهم واستولد علي رضي الله عنه منهم أم ابن الحنفية ثم أجمع الصحابة على أن المرتد لا يسبى. So there's two categories, essentially three categories, right? You have those that were that disbelieved either through following a false prophet or returning back to what they were on in Jahiliyyah. And then you had those who were not considered murtad. والصنف الثاني لم يرتدوا عن الإيمان ولكن أنكروا فرض الزكاة وزعموا أن قوله تعالى خذ من أموالهم صدقة خطاب خاص بزمانه صلى الله عليه وسلم ولذا اشتبه على عمر رضي الله عنه قتالهم لإقرارهم بالتوحيد والصلاة وثبت أبو بكر رضي الله عنه على قتالهم فتابعه الصحابة رضي الله عنهم لأنهم كانوا قريب العهد قريب العهد بزمان يقع فيه التبديل والنسخ فلم آه، فلم يقروا عليه وهم أهل بغي فنسبوا إلى أهل الردة حيث كانوا في زمانهم فانسحب عليهم اسمها. فأما بعد ذلك فمن أنكر فريضة أحد أركان الإسلام كفر بالإجماع. وكان مناظرة الشيخين فيهم لا في من كفر، فذكر كفر من كفر، فذكر كفر من كفر وقع اتفاقا، أو أطلق الكفر عليهم تغليظا كذا في مجمع البحار. And so when in this narration when it says كفر من كفر, those who the mani'in of zakat, of paying zakah, they were at that point there was some ambiguity. They weren't necessarily they didn't necessarily leave the fold of Islam, and so kafara man kafara can be understood in two ways. One is that this is this is referring to the whole scenario that there were a lot of people that did kufr, and not particularly to this group of people, or these people are being bundled into those who disbelieved, even though they didn't actually disbelieve, because of how severe their aggression was. Right? And so this is from the sunnah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that right, where the hadith comes, alaykum bi sunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa ar-rashidin. And so this is the first sunnah established by Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, establishing when it would be would be valid to take up arms against a portion of the Muslim community. And so this is, generally speaking, the sunan of the khulafa that are supposed to be followed, that are meant in that are meant in that those hadith, are the sunan regarding governance and politics, because there were the Muslim government was still in its early stages, and there was a lot of there were a lot of changes and a lot of things that took place after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? The Khilafah expanded, it stabilized. There was a lot of political changes, and so in terms of politics and governance, that their practices are precedent, and they're considered sunnah in that sense. And so this idea that if someone is leaving something that is fundamental to Islam, or you have someone leaving a group of people that are collectively agreeing to leave one of the sha'a'ir of Islam, for example, like adhan, then those would be valid reasons to attack them.
Jay, can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So, in today's time, where there's a lot more difference of opinion, and I guess you could say historically, there's obviously a difference between like consensus amongst the ulama, but there's also like outside of the form of madhab, there's different opinions, right? So how do you like understand like groups that basically use this to say, we can fight the other Muslims because they don't agree on this core tenet of faith, whereas they don't describe it as a core tenet of faith or something like that?
There are, well, if there is a valid difference of opinion, then it's not a core tenet of faith. Right? If there's room for difference of opinion, and it's a valid difference of opinion, and the definition of valid difference of opinion is, especially in these days, is a little bit more unclear. Historically, it was within the form of madhahib. Anything that was within the form of madhahib was considered a valid difference of opinion. Anything beyond that was considered not a valid difference of opinion. And that is still, for a large body of scholars, that is still the criteria. But even those that don't take that as a criteria, the issues that they differ in and the issues where they go beyond the four madhahib are not going to be, they're going to be secondary issues. You have whether it be the mas'ala of the three talaq mas'ala, for example, which is outside of the four madhahib, or you have the issue of music, which is outside of the four madhahib, or you have the issue of a number of issues, right? Those are all secondary issues. They have you have certain things that are considered from the sha'a'ir of Islam, or ma'lum min ad-din bil-darura. And so if those things are collectively accepted by society or collectively agreed upon, the whole city, the whole country decides to accept that, then this is where this would take this would apply. Does that make sense?
Yeah, does that okay? I guess I'm wondering, like you brought up the point of like people, for example, who disagree with the fact that there is differences of opinion at all, like not even about valid differences of opinion. Like, is it just basically up to them at that point?
Yeah. So the idea of khilaf mu'tabar or khilaf sa'ir is a matter that is a little unclear, okay? And so that's why you had over time the four madhahib became standardized, and that became the general criteria. So generally speaking, that is what the realm of the valid difference of opinion. You have the four madhahib of fiqh and the three madhahib of aqidah, which are considered to be within the realm of acceptable differences, right? And then in terms of, even if there are certain positions that an individual holds outside of that, either it's a secondary issue, or that's an individually held position that's not a collective position that an entire community holds. And so it wouldn't be, it wouldn't fall under, this would not apply to any of those situations. Right. The other thing that needs to be kept in mind is, right, fiqhi. Oftentimes in these types of issues, you have people that conflate fiqh and aqidah, right? And so there'll be a fiqhi, for example, doing sajda to a grave. Is that in and of itself shirk or not? Right? It's something that is haram. It's something that's haram, right? That the Prophet told us that doing sajda to anything is impermissible. And if there was anyone that sajda would be allowed to do, it would be the wife to the husband, right? Something along, you have the hadith along those lines. So doing sajda to anything is haram. It's clear-cut haram. Someone does it. Does that automatically mean it's shirk? And the answer is no. It would be shirk if there was something explicitly shirky associated with it, something polytheistic associated with it, whether it be the statements that he makes or the belief that he does it with. But in and of itself, that's not shirk, right? It is sinful. It is, right? You have sajda that's mentioned in, right? فسجد الملائكة كلهم أجمعون. The Malaika did sajda to Adam alayhi salam. ورفع أبويه على العرش وخروا له سجدا. That day did sajda to Yusuf alayhi salam, and this was a sajda of ta'zim. So in previous nations, sajda to other than Allah with the intention of ta'zim was allowed. And so you have those kinds of issues that come up here as well, where people conflate fiqh and aqidah. The fiqh issue is one thing, is sajda to other than Allah allowed, and that's haram. But if someone engages in that, is that what have they've committed a sin, and if it comes with certain beliefs or certain statements or actions, then it would take them out of the fold of Islam, but in itself it doesn't. Similarly, you have the discussion of tawassul and istighatha, right? Those are issues of those are fiqhi issues where on making dua in a specific way and wording your du'as in a certain way, right? Is it permissible or not? And so that is a fiqhi issue, and it's not a aqidah issue. And so that's another thing that comes up over here, is conflating fiqh and aqidah. So doing tawassul and istighatha would be, many scholars would consider it haram, and others may allow it. But even those that allow it, they're not saying that it's mustahab necessarily, they're saying it's allowed. And so taking the permission to do that and running with it and making that your norm, that is that is not the norm that was established by the Prophet and the Sahaba. Even if there may be proofs to allow it, that's not the norm, and it shouldn't be made the norm, even if you take the position that it's allowed. And so generally the position of my teachers was that those things were tawassul and istighatha are impermissible, they're haram, but it's a fiqhi issue, not an aqidah issue. And so that's another thing that people often get confused about, which then leads to misapplying these types of hadith. Okay. The next chapter is essentially has the same chapter heading, and the idea here is that when it says حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله, لا إله إلا الله doesn't simply mean saying لا إله إلا الله. It means to holistically enter the fold of Islam. Right? And so this next chapter is clarifying that point, that La ilaha illallah doesn't mean simply saying La ilaha illallah. It means to holistically accept Islam and follow the commandments of the Sharia. Continue.
وبه قال حدثنا سعيد بن يعقوب الطالقاني قال حدثنا
There are two ways of reading this. You can read it as طالقاني or الطالقاني with the sukun on that. The idea is that these are non-Arab names, and so when you're doing ta'adib, when you're converting it to Arabic, how closely are you going to pronounce it to the original pronunciation in the language? And so that's where these differences come up.
قال حدثنا ابن المبارك قال حدثنا حميد الطويل عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله وأن يستقبلوا قبلتنا ويأكلوا ذبيحتنا وأن يصلوا صلاتنا، فإذا فعلوا ذلك حرمت عليهم دماؤهم وأموالهم إلا بحقها، لهم ما للمسلمين وعليهم ما على المسلمين. وفي الباب عن معاذ بن جبل وأبي هريرة رضي الله عنهما. هذا حديث حسن صحيح غريب من هذا الوجه، وقد رواه يحيى بن أيوب عن حميد عن أنس رضي الله عنه نحوه.
So this in this hadith, it explicitly mentions that وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَأَن يَسْتَقْبِلُوا قِبْلَتَنَا, right? It mentions certain certain beliefs, certain actions fundamental to Islam that are and so it highlights the point that it's not just saying that ilaha illallah, but it's also following the Prophet ﷺ and following the tenets of Islam, facing the qibla and eating the biha, right? These are highlighted because these are, I guess you could say, these are fundamentals of things that make up a Muslim community. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone who, right, if someone prays towards the qibla, that they're automatically Muslim. But this is something that generally indicates to someone being Muslim, eating the biha, eating meat that is slaughtered according to Islamic standards. That is something that is generally done by Muslims, right? So these are things that identify someone as Muslim in a society, and so that's why it's being highlighted over here. In the previous chapter, right? Wallahi law mana'uni iqalan. Iqal is either a strap or a rein of an animal, like a right. So it's going to be like a string. Iqal in certain contexts can mean the strap of a shoe, or it can be referring to the rein of an animal. And in the footnote, he mentions that there's also a possibility that means the zakah of animals. Zakatu aami min al-ibili wal ghanami, that the zakah, a year of zakah of livestock, essentially from camels and goats and sheep.
So those that say you don't have to eat every hide in line with the that they just making that exception based on the need of the Christians and the Jews like the other hadith.
So this is not saying that this is not talking about that, right? They are saying that meets the criteria of the biha. Right? So it's the question. This term dhabiha and non-dhabiha is a little bit. It's not the best term. It's become what's common, but they're not saying that what they're eating is not dhabiha. If it wasn't dhabiha, then it wouldn't. Yeah, it's just there's a specific standard that dhabiha is a specific standard, and so if it meets that standard, then it's halal. And those that eat quote unquote non-dhabiha, they feel like that other meat meets the standards of what is halal. So it's so that wouldn't that discussion wouldn't really be relevant to this. Continue.
قال باب ما جاء بني الإسلام على 5. وبه قال حدثنا ابن أبي عمر قال حدثنا سفيان بن عيينة عن سعير بن الخمس التميمي عن حبيب بن أبي ثابت عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بني الإسلام على 5: شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج البيت. وفي الباب عن جرير بن عبد الله رضي الله عنه. هذا حديث حسن صحيح، وقد روي من غير وجه عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نحو هذا. وسعير بن الخمس ثقة عند أهل الحديث. حدثنا أبو كريب حدثنا وكيع.
قال حدثنا
وبه قال حدثنا أبو كريب قال حدثنا وكيع عن حنظلة بن أبي سفيان الجمحي عن عكرمة بن خالد المخزومي عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نحوه. هذا حديث حسن صحيح.
Right, so this is the famous hadith about the 5 pillars of Islam. Right, this is a metaphor that the Prophet is making about these 5 things being fundamental to the Islam of a person, different fundamental acts of faith. And these are highlighted because of their they're comprehensive to the different two different aspects of the Sharia, and also these are from those acts that are these are from the fard acts that are maqsoodun fi nafsihi maqsood بالذات, that they are their primary, they are the objectives themselves. You have certain fara'id which are you have certain fara'id that are fara'id for secondary reasons, like jihad or wudu or what have you. But these things are fara'id, and their objectives in and of themselves. That you pray for, you're praying because you're praying for prayer. You're giving zakah because zakah is an obligation. Zakah is not. That is the objective, right? Essentially. Versus when you do wudu, wudu is fard because it allows you to pray. Right? And so you have these things that make these 5 pillars unique. Some people have the question that why is the Shahada considered a pillar of Islam? Is it right? Islam, these are all outward actions, and you have Shahada. And so this is talking about testifying itself, the outward expression of what's faith, right? And so there's that distinction. And testimony has its consequences, and whatnot, right? And so it's the outward testimony of faith, and so it is an outward action. It's not, and that's why it's included over here. Although belief is in the heart, but testifying it outwardly is from the 5 pillars. And so you have this first chain, and then he mentions another chain that he has, going back to Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu as well. He says that this is authentic, and this narrator Su'ayr ibn Khims is authentic, but he brings a supporting chain as well, just to further strengthen that. The next chapter is the chapter on the hadith of Jibreel, and he says he titles it Jibreel alayhi salam describing Iman and Islam to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite the fact that in the hadith, Jibreel, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one that's going to be explaining what Iman and Islam is. And the reason he does that is because Jibreel alayhi salam is the sabab, the cause for this, for the explanation. He is the one who asks, and as a result of his question, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responds. And so that's why he calls it that. Inshallah. Plus, you want to? I don't know if you want to come a little closer so that it's easier for her to. There we go.
قال باب ما وصف جبرائيل للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الإيمان والإسلام. وبه قال حدثنا أبو عمار الحسين بن حريث الخزاعي قال حدثنا وكيع عن كهمس بن الحسن عن عبد الله بن بريدة عن يحيى بن يعمر قال أول من تكلم في القدر معبد الجهني قال خرجت أنا وحميد بن عبد الرحمن الحميري حتى أتينا المدينة فقلنا كنا لو لقينا رجلا من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فسألناه عما أحدث هؤلاء القوم فلقد
أحدث over here means to invent, right? And this you have the Qadariyya start to emerge at this time, and so this hadith will, one of the things when he talks about Iman is Qadar, and so that's why this is going to be relevant to this context.
فلقيناه يعيا بالله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما وهو خارج من المسجد قال فاستفتوه أنا وصاحبي فقلت يا أبا عبد الرحمن إن قوما يقرؤون القرآن ويتكفرون العلم ويزعمون أن لا قدر وأن الأمر أنف قال فإذا لقيت أولئك فأخبرهم أني منهم بريء وأنهم مني براء والذي يحلف به عبد الله لو أن أحدهم أنفق مثل أحد ذهبا ما قبل ذلك منه حتى يؤمن بقدر خيره وشره. قال ثم أنشأ يحدث فقال قال عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه كنا عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فجاء رجل شديد بياض الثياب شديد سواد الشعر لا يرى عليه أثر السفر ولا يعرفه منا أحد حتى أتى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فألزق ركبته بركبته ثم قال يا محمد ما الإيمان؟ قال أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره. قال فما الإسلام؟ قال شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد عبده ورسوله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وحج البيت وصوم رمضان. قال فما الإحسان؟ قال أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. قال في كل ذلك يقول له صدق. قال فتعجبنا منه يسأله ويصدقه. قال فمتى الساعة؟ قال
متى الساعة؟
قال ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل. قال فما أمارتها؟ قال أن تلد الأمة رب.
So ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل. One of the reasons he responds in that way is to highlight the fact that no one will know. It's not just that he doesn't know, but no one will know those details of when the day of judgment is.
قال فما أمارتها؟ قال أن تلد الأمة ربتها وأن ترى الحفاة العراة العالة رعاء الشاء ويتطاولون في البنيان. قال عمر رضي الله عنه فلقي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فلقيني النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بعد ذلك بثلاث فقال يا عمر هل تدري من السائل؟ ذلك جبرائيل أتاكم يعلمكم أمر دينكم. وبه قال حدثنا أحمد بن محمد قال حدثنا ابن المبارك قال حدثنا كحمس بن الحسن بهذا الإسناد نحوه بمعناه. وبه قال حدثنا محمد بن المثنى قال حدثنا معاذ بن هشام عن كحمس بهذا الإسناد نحوه بمعناه. وفي الباب عن طلحة بن عبيد الله وأنس بن مالك وأبي هريرة رضي الله عنهم هذا حديث صحيح حسن قد روي من غير وجه نحو هذا. وقد روي هذا الحديث عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والصحيح هو عن ابن عمر عن عمر رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So this is a famous hadith. You guys have covered it in Arba'in and other places. So we don't need to go into the details. But in the beginning, there are a few words that are unclear, that may be unclear. قال on the previous page فَاتَّنَفْتُهُ أَنَا وَصَاحِبِي. So we surrounded him, essentially, right? اكتنف فاكتنفته. I surrounded him, me and my companion. So we surrounded him. And then they said, إن قوم يقرؤون القرآن ويتقفرون العلم. تقفر يتقفر تقفرا. And so that means essentially when it comes in this context, it means to seek knowledge. He said over here in the footnote, يعني أنهم يستخرجون غامضه ويفتحون مغلقه، وأصله من فقرت البئر إذا حفرتها لاستخراج مائها، لما كانت القدرية بهذه الصفة. Right. That they would بهذه الصفة من البحث والتتبع لاستخراج المعاني الغامضة غامضة بدقائق التأويلات، وصفهم بذلك، ومعنى الرواية المشهورة يطلبون العلم. So جاء في رواية بتقديم الفاء على القاف. So this is يتقفرون, and then you also have يتفقرون. And so according to so بتقديم الفاء, بتقديم الفاء, so the first meaning, going into the depths of something and unpacking those ويفتحون مغلقه, unpacking those things that are مغلق. When you call something knowledge to be مغلق, it means it's dense, it's difficult, and so unpacking that. So that's, if you read it, يتفقرون, and if you read it يتقفرون, as it is over here, that means يطلبون العلم. You have over here it says ألزق ركبته بركبته. ألزق means to join or to connect. You have over here حفاة عراة عالة, and حفاة عراة and رعاء. Those are all plurals of the ism fa'il. And they're all naqis. They're all the plural of the ism fa'il, and their singulars are all ism manqus. حفاة حافي, عراة عاري, رعاء راعي. So those are all plurals. عالة means is the plural of the ism fa'il as well, meaning the singular is عائل, which means poor. And then sha is the plural of shatun, which means goats or sheep. Okay. Any questions on this hadith? So أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. Right? This is worship Allah as if you can see Him. And so there's two understandings to this. One is فإن لم تكن تراه, that if you cannot see Him. Another understanding is that you will not be able to see Him, so know that He sees you. And so that's a less common opinion, but that's one opinion. The other is that أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه, that worship Him as if you see Him. This is in the form of, in the sense of istihdar, and understanding that you are standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are dealing directly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and having that mindset that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching you. So it's as if you see Him, كأنك تراه. Not seeing Him, but as if you see Him. But keeping that in your mind, that you are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there, and He's watching over everything. So it is as if you see Him. And if you're not able to, then the lower level is that at least know and be conscious that He sees you. Ihsan literally means ihsan yuhsinu ihsana. It can be used in two ways. It can be used in the meaning of excellence or perfection, itqan, or it can be in the meaning of doing good to someone else. So it can have those two meanings. And when it has the meaning of doing good to someone else, it's generally used with the preposition إلى. أحسن كما أحسن الله إليك. Right? Do good just as Allah has done good to you. Just as Allah has been good to you, Allah has favored you, etc. Right? Over here, it's in the meaning of how can we show excellence in our religion, essentially. You have the right. This is the you have different terms and that are used. You have ihsan, tazkiyah, tasawwuf. All of those words are used interchangeably. In ihsan and tazkiyah are the more commonly used words are used in the Quran and the Sunnah. But the term tasawwuf it's a term. Okay? What exactly is meant by it? Everyone is going to define it differently, is going to talk about it differently, but it's a term referring to the same science of Islam, the same aspect of Islam. And you have even like Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, where a whole section at the end of his Majmu' al-Fatawa talks about tasawwuf. He will have his critiques of certain practices and different things, but this idea that we need to purify our heart and work on our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is universally accepted. And so it may be wise to use terms like ihsan and tazkiyah to avoid causing unnecessary divisions, and people automatically will jump to certain conclusions when you use a word like tasawwuf or tasawwuf or Sufi or what have you. And so using these more widely accepted terms, these more generic terms, is generally better in a general audience. You say ihsan, you say tazkiyah, you say zuhud. These were terms used by either used in the ihsan and tazkiyah you'll find in the Quran and Sunnah. Zuhud was used by earlier scholars as well. You have books on zuhud by Imam Ahmad and others, which are essentially talking about tazkiyah. And so when you're talking about it in public discourse, it's probably better to use these terms that everyone's familiar with, just because people jump to conclusions when you use a term like tasawwuf. Continue.
قال باب ما جاء في إضافة الفرائض إلى الإيمان. وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا عباد بن عباد المهلبي عن أبي جمرة عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال قدم وفد عبد القيس على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقالوا إن هذا الحي من ربيعة ولسنا نصل إليك إلا في الشهر الحرام فمرنا بشيء نأخذه عنك وندعو إليه من وراءنا فقال أمركم بأربع الإيمان بالله ثم فسرها لهم شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأني رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وأن تؤدوا خمس ما غنمتم. وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا حماد بن زيد عن أبي جمرة قال عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مثله. هذا حديث حسن صحيح. وأبو جمرة الضبعي اسمه نصر بن عمران وقد روى شعبة عن أبي جمرة أيضا وزاد فيه أتدرون ما الإيمان شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأني رسول الله فذكر الحديث. سمعت قال؟
No, you can just say قال سمعت.
قال سمعت قتيبة بن سعيد يقول ما رأيت مثل هؤلاء الفقهاء الأشراف الأربعة مالك بن أنس والليث بن سعد وعباد بن عباد المهلبي وعبد الوهاب الثقفي. قال قتيبة وكنا نرضى أن نرجع كل يوم من عند عباد بن عباد بحديثين. وعباد بن عباد هو من ولد المهلبي بن أبي صخرة.
So over here, these final notes, he's clarifying that there's Abi Jamrah, that's his kunya, what's his actual name. And then he's highlighting the status of Abbad ibn Abbad al-Muhallabi as one of the greatest fuqaha and greatest scholars of that time. And so over here you have the wafd of Abdul Qais, which came from Bahrain. Bahrain is larger than the modern country of Bahrain. It is essentially the eastern coastal region of Arabia, right? And so Abdul Qais comes from Bahrain in the 8th year after Hijrah, and they come in the sacred months to visit the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so it says that we are إن هذا الحي من ربيعة, that this tribe essentially is from the sub-tribes of Rabi'a. So if you go back through the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, Nizar ibn Ma'ad had 2 sons, Mudar and Rabi'a. So you have certain, right? You have certain major breaks in Arabian lineage, right? So Adnan is a major figure, and his lineage is highlighted, even though he's from Banu Ismail, but his lineage is highlighted particularly. Then as you go down, you have over here you have this break where you have Rabi'a and Mudar. Those are 2 famous tribes, and then you have other sub-tribes, but those are 2 famous tribes. And then you'll have sub-tribes. And then from Mudar is the lineage of the Prophet goes to Mudar. So you'll have the Quraysh, who are a famous sub-tribe from Mudar. But Mudar, you have other tribes that are not as famous as Quraysh that will just attribute themselves to, we are the tribes of Mudar. They'll attribute themselves to that higher up, a person that's a little bit more higher up in lineage. And so Rabi'a and Mudar were the 2 famous sub-tribes of Nizar ibn Ma'ad. And so they would fight between there would always be infighting between the tribes of Rabi'a and the tribes of Mudar. And so the tribe of Abdul Qais was from Rabi'a, and they came and they're like, we can't لَسْنَا نَصِلُ إِلَيْكَ إِلَّا فِي الشَّهْرِ الْحَرَامِ. We can't reach you except in the sacred months, because if we travel at any time, the tribes of Mudar are going to try to attack us, and we're from Rabi'a. And so give us some commandments. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he says, he tells them to have faith in Allah, and then he talks about Salah and Zakah, and highlights, and then on top of that he highlights Tu'addul Khumus, because they mentioned that they are always engaged, they have this constant fighting that takes place between them and Mudar, and so that was something that was relevant to them immediately at the moment, and so he highlights that point as well. And so Salah and Zakah are the 2 primary pillars of the 5 pillars. Salah and Zakah are 2 of the primary ones, and then you have Khumus, which is relevant to them in their particular situation. There's the Khumus is the 1/5 that you give in. So when you have you give 1/5 of what you earn in spoils of war. Ma ghanimtum, what you earn in spoils of war. And so because they were always engaging in war, they were gonna eventually have spoils of war that they would have to distribute. And so he highlights this point to them because this is relevant to them. I just thought of this right now, but I don't. There's another hadith about Abdul Qais coming, where you have a delegation from Abdul Qais, the hadith of Ashaj Abdul Qais, where the Prophet ﷺ praises him. إن فيك لخصلتان يحبهم الله الحلم والأناة. So this was where is this? أشد عبد القيس. I'm trying to see if this is the same incident or different. I don't know. I should look that up. But there's another incident that hadith also talks about the delegation of Abdul Qais coming to the Prophet ﷺ, and the leader of the tribe, Ashaj Abdul Qais. Ashaj is his title. The Prophet ﷺ praises him for having forbearance and calmness, not rushing, essentially. And so that's also narrated regarding Abdul Qais.
Is this the hadith that Shia called it Zakat Khums or something? Think about 20 or something.
I'm not sure. Right. The asl for khums is أن لله خمسه وللرسول ولذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والسائلين. That's the ayah regarding khums.
You're saying in the context of spoils of war, or
In the context of spoils of war, right? So it's given to the Prophet ﷺ, and he can spend it based on his discretion after the time of the Prophet ﷺ and went to the Bayt al-Mal, right? And so that was what would fund the economy, basically, right? These types of things. Continue.
قال باب في استكمال الإيمان والزيادة والنقصان. وبقال حدثنا أحمد بن منيع البغدادي قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن علية قال حدثنا خالد بن حذاء عن أبي قلابة عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن من أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا أحسنهم خلقا وألطفهم خلقا وألطفهم بأهله. وفي الباب عن ابي هريره عن انس بن مالك رضي الله عنهما هذا حديث حسن ولا نعرف لابي قلابه سماعا من عائشه رضي الله عنهما وقد روى ابو قلابه عن عبد الله بن يزيد رضيع لعائشه رضي الله عنها عن عائشه رضي الله عنها غير هذا الحديث. وابو قلابه اسمه عبد الله بن زيد الجرمي. وبه قال حدثنا ابن ابي عمر قال حدثنا سفيان بن عيينة قال ذكر أيوب السختياني أبا قيابة فقال كان والله من الفقهاء ذوي الألباب.
So he's bringing this hadith إن من أكمل المؤمنين إيمانا, talking about إكمال الإيمان, right? Iman being complete. And so this indicates towards the fact that that Iman can increase and decrease because it can be deficient and it can be complete. If Iman can be deficient, that means that there can be change in the level of Iman. And again, this we mentioned it was earlier, the khilaf lafzi. And then he highlights the narrators that you have. Um, um, over here, that Abu Qilaba narrates directly from Aisha radiallahu anha, and Abu Qilaba is not known to have heard from Aisha radiallahu anha, but he is a great scholar, as he mentions later on. كان والله من الفقهاء ذوي الألباب. And Abu Qilaba in another narration narrates from Abdullah bin Zayd from Aisha, so with a wasita. And so that's probably the missing link is Abdullah bin Yazid. And so that's kind of, he just highlighting that to show that to basically strengthen the narration, that even though there's a link missing, this is possibly who he's narrating from, and he is from one of the greatest scholars of his time.
وبيقال حدثنا أبو عبد الله إبراهيم بن مسعر الأزدي الترمذي قال حدثنا عبد العزيز بن محمد عن سهيل بن أبي صالح عن أبي عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خطب الناس فوعظهم ثم قال يا معشر النساء تصدقنا فإن كنا أكثر أهل النار. فقالت امرأة منهن ولم ذاك يا رسول الله؟ قال لكثرة لعنكن يعني وكفركن العشير. قال وما رأيت من ناقصات عقل ودين أذهب لذوي الألباب وذوي الرأي منكن. قالت امرأة منهن وما نقصان عقلها ودينها؟ قال شهادة امرأتين منكن بشهادة رجل ونقصان دينكن الحيضة فتمكث إحداكن الثلاث والأربع لا تصلي.
And so over here, right, this is a famous hadith, right, that women are the majority of the hellfire. We mentioned that one of the explanations is that overall women are more than men, and so that's why they'll be the majority in the hellfire, and they'll be the majority in heaven as well. And then the Prophet ﷺ highlights some of the key things that the key sins that women fall into that they don't realize. And so كثرة لعنكم, that the abundance of your cursing, meaning your ungratefulness to your husband, meaning that, right, it's explained in another hadith that essentially be careful not to overlook the good that people have done, that someone has done to you, and specifically in this context, the husband, and don't just highlight the bad that they've done, right? So being ungrateful to those around you, and specifically to the husband. So he's highlighting that point, right? That this is something that women oftentimes fall into that they don't realize they're falling into. So just be wary of that, and this leads them to the hellfire. And then you have ناقصات عقل ودين, right? ناقصات عقل. This means that this is referring to the fact that they are more emotional. Women are more emotional than men, generally speaking. That women are more emotional than men, and so their emotions can overpower their intellect, and so that's why it's ناقصات عقل. And deen, he mentions what it's referring to, right? That they have less opportunities to engage in things like prayer because of their hayd. However, right, everyone is this doesn't mean that they're gonna have less standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everyone will be judged based on their circumstances. Our deeds are weighed, not counted. So if someone if a woman prays, if a woman does not pray during their hayd, and they do this because this is the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they are rewarded for that, right? And so women have different opportunities to do good, men have different opportunities to do good, and everyone will be judged individually based on their own circumstances. وَكُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا. Everyone will be judged individually based on their circumstances, and your deeds will be weighed based on the sincerity, based on the intention, all of those things. And so this does not in any way mean that men are automatically going to be at a higher rank than women in the hereafter. We're just talking about the nature and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created women. And so these are things that women need to work on navigating and dealing with, and making sure they don't they understand these differences and work on themselves accordingly. فتمكث إحداكن الثلاث والأربع لا تصلي. So this is 3 or 4 days, and some take from this the lowest أقل مدة الحيض, that this is the shortest that the hayd can be, a cycle can be, is 3 days. And I don't think there's anything else. Continue.
It's justification of women being the most in the fire, but also the most in Jannah. Like, is that coming in the hadith, or is that just what they're derived? Like about
That's derived from certain ulama. Looking at the reality over historically, it's there have been more women than men.
Yeah. I guess the question that comes up from critiques of this, right, or maybe we can't answer this because Bob says he spoke how he spoke, but knowing it could be misconstrued, right? So,
And historically there are scholars that have taken it to be literal.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if it is the case, it's true. Right?
It's from the Prophet ﷺ, right? And the idea, this is from the Prophet ﷺ, that's one understanding. And another understanding that scholars historically have had is that they're just women are more prone to end up in the hellfire, right? And that is an opinion you'll see in the shul. But that's not. The idea is that it's not explicit in that regard, and so it doesn't need to be understood in that way. And based on other criteria, we would understand it. We would say it's more correct to understand it in the way that we mentioned, because right, everyone is inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, and you have general nusus like that, in light of which we need to understand the hadith, right? So when you look at the idea that you have these general nusus and these general principles, and we have to understand the hadith in regards to that, then that's where we come to this conclusion and we come to this understanding. That doesn't mean that someone who understands it, this isn't قطعي الدلالة, right? It's not قطعي الثبوت or قطعي الدلالة. It's not clear and it's خبر واحد, so it's not قطعي, it's ثبوت, it's not قطعي. It's dalala, meaning there's room for interpretation, room for differences. And so you're not going to do kufr of someone who takes a different position. You're not going to, you should be respectful of that difference of opinion, however it may make you feel. And at the end of the day, right, this is, our faith is not based on something like this, right? Our faith is based on the Quran, the character of the Prophet ﷺ, our belief in the Prophet ﷺ as a whole, and then these secondary issues are built upon that, right? So we have to have that strong, solid foundation of faith in Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then it's easier to deal with these things.
And similarly for the rationalization about what did you say?
ناقصات عقل
Yeah,
ودين.
not happening. So like, we don't. Do we find more explicitly directly to the Prophet ﷺ that justification of it being more? It's not about less intellect; it's about more emotion. Or is that just another broad understanding?
Well, from the context and the different things, that's it's been explained in that way, right? Looking at the context of the hadith, the reality on the ground. You have in one of the, what is it? If we pull up the different versions of the hadith, one of them, for example, right, you have, what is it? Right, the Prophet right, he says, ما رأيت من ناقصات عقل ودين أذهب للب الرجل الحازم من إحداكن. Right, the fact that they can influence a man, right? It's not that may take intellect to do, right? أذهب أذهب للب الرجل الحازم من إحداكن, that a woman can basically cause a man to lose their intellect. A hazim is someone who is what's the word? Hazim, like someone who's firm in their affairs. ضابط لأمره. Right. So what?
What was the beginning of the hadith?
ما رأيت من ناقصات عقل ودين أذهب للب الرجل الحازم من إحداكن.
So how do you reconcile those?
So you can say, right? So you can say that takes intellect to.
But he started it by saying, "I have not seen anyone."
I mean,
but I see what you're saying,
yeah.
right? Like it's saying
that
influence,
to influence someone, there has to be a level of intellect.
correct. I'm saying the hadith that's true in the meaning, right? But the hadith started by saying "La ra'aytu ahadan."
It's a way of mubalagha, right? It's a way of showing, right? The Prophet ﷺ is going to address different groups in different ways, right? So he's addressing women specifically, and so he's pointing this out to women he tries to keep that balance between hope and fear. So this is a situation where he's trying to instill fear in them of the hereafter so that they strive to be better. And on the other end, you have, right, situations where he's going to put hope, right? And so this is something that he's addressing specifically to women. And so he wants to highlight these points and emphasize it more.
And then lastly, we're learning about this in usul, but obviously different fuqaha use different frameworks as to how they, use the hadith in terms of deriving a ruling. Or are there any more hadith? Maybe it's not a hadith question. Maybe it's just a fiqh question that like completely disregard. I don't say disregard. That give extremely little weight to khabar ahad, even if it's sahih, in the sense of we know like the Ahnaf.
So the Ahnaf don't give little weight to khabar ahad. The idea is the Hanafi school tries to take a principled approach. So they establish principle. So when you say when it mentions that the Hanafis give preference to qiyas is referring to qawa'id, right? General principles that are established through tawatur, right? And so they take those principles and then they understand the individual narrations based on those principles. So if an individual narration goes against the established principle, we will understand it in light of that principle. will understand it in light of that principle. And so that's the idea, right? And you have famous scholars and famous muhaddithin that followed the Hanafi school in furu', right? Such as, if I'm not mistaken, Yahya ibn Ma'in followed the Hanafi school in furu'. So 50 positions, he would follow the madhab of Imam Hadith. Yahya ibn Ma'in. He's a famous scholar of hadith. He's either a contemporary of Imam Ahmad or a teacher of Imam Ahmad. Then contemporary of Imam Ahmad.
I guess I'm wondering from like a rational perspective. So I understand obviously the context of you don't want to disregard anything, any report of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That's why even the Hanbalis will, for example, put more preference even on, for example, some of the Khabar in light of other evidences. But I'm wondering, like, from the perspective of if it's a ruling of the Sharia, why would the Prophet ﷺ have only hold it to one? Maybe he didn't say to one person, but to so few people, right? In the sense of it didn't become something that was mutawātir or wider spread. So, like, can you derive a ruling from something that comes from a singular report? Is there anybody who takes that perspective?
No, a singular report, everyone says it's a hujjah and it's proof, right? From Ahlul Sunnah. That's the Mu'tazila, that's why the Mu'tazila had more stringent requirements, which allowed them to reject certain hadith, right? And so either they would require it to at least have one to be Aziz, or they had different.
They are groups, but it was the Mu'tazila.
Yeah, which the Mu'tazila would be extremely skeptical of Qadr Wahid. Yeah.
But there were no mainstream groups that thought that, even though, like, rationally, for me, maybe that's something that's come up a little bit sometimes. I like the Ahnaf's approach where it's like, okay, you use the Khabar Ahad in light of it. There's not other overarching principles, right?
And you don't completely disregard the Ahnaf do not say you disregard it. You interpret it in light of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's always going to be things that people don't know, right?
Yeah.
There's always but the fact that people don't know it or less people know it doesn't mean it's not part of the Sharia. Not everyone's going to know everything, and that's why you have certain Sahaba that you had different tiers of Sahaba in terms of their ilm. You had certain Fuqaha from the Sahaba, and then you had the laity of the Sahaba, and their level of knowledge was very different.
Yeah, it's also not like not knowing. It's more that if it was part of the deen, why would it have only been told to one person, unless explicitly?
Well, it wasn't necessarily told to one person, but it's coming through us through one
That is
person.
the big difference. You don't really know who it was told to.
Exactly.
Because
We know the Prophet said it, and we know he said it to at least one person. There could have been more, and that's where the dhann comes in. Right? Everything from the perspective of the Sahaba, nothing is dhanni because they witnessed it directly from the Prophet, right? But from our perspective, it's dhanni because we don't know. Well, we don't know exactly. We only know maybe one Sahabi, the narrative from the Prophet. So being dhanni is from our perspective, not from the perspective of the statement itself.
وبيقال حدثنا أبو كريب
وفي الباب عن أبي سعيد وابن عمر رضي الله عنه هذا حديث حسن صحيح.
وبيقال حدثنا أبو كريب قال حدثنا وكيع عن سفيان عن سهيل بن أبي صالح عن عبد الله بن دينار عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الإيمان بدع. So
we'll mention this in the beginning. It's better if we say رضي الله عنه وعنهم, just so we're making dua for the other scholars in the chain as well.
رضي الله عنه وعنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الإيمان بدع و70 بابا فأدناها إماطة الأذى عن الطريق وارفعها قول لا إله إلا الله. هذا حديث حسن صحيح. وهكذا روى سهيل بن أبي صالح عن عبد الله بن دينار عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه وعنهم. وروى عمارة بن غزية هذا الحديث عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه وعنهم عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الإيمان 64 بابا. وبيقال حدثنا بلال بن قتيبة قال حدثنا بكر بن مضر عن عمارة بن غزية عن أبي صالح عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So again, this is indicating towards the fact that Iman has increases and decreases because you have you have different branches of Iman, and you have the lowest branch and the highest branch, and so this indicates that fact.
قال باب ما جاء الحياء من الإيمان. وقال حدثنا ابن أبي عمر وأحمد بن منيع عن المعنى واحد. قال حدثنا سفيان بن عيينة عن الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه رضي الله عنه وعنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Who is أبيه هنا؟ This is Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar. So his father is going to be Abdullah ibn Umar.
أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مر برجل وهو يعيد أخاه في الحياة، فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الحياء من الإيمان. قال أحمد بن منيع في حديثه إن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سمع رجلا يعيد أخاه. هذا حديث حسن صحيح وفي الباب عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward.
قال باب ما جاء في حرمة الصلاة. وقال حدثنا ابن أبي عمر قال حدثنا عبد الله بن معاذ الصنعاني وعن معمر عن عاصم بن أبي النجودي عن أبي وائل عن معاذ بن جبل.
عن عاصم بن أبي النجودي. This is the famous قاضي.
عن معاذ بن جبل رضي الله عنه قال كنت مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر فأصبحت يوما قريبا منه ونحن نسير، فقلت يا رسول الله أخبرني بعمل يدخلني الجنة ويباعدني عن النار. قال لقد سألتني عن عظيم، وإنه ليسير على من يسره الله عليه. تعبد الله ولا تشرك به شيئا وتقيم الصلاة
ولا تشرك به
شيئا وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان وتحج البيت. ثم قال ألا أدلك على أبواب الخير؟ الصوم جنة والصدقة تطفئ الخطيئة كما يطفئ ماء النار، وصلاة الرجل من جوف الليل. قال ثم ثلاثة تجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع يدعون ربهم حتى بلغ يعملون. ثم قال ألا أخبرك برأس الأمر كله وعموده وذروة السنام؟ قلت بلى يا رسول الله. قال رأس الأمر الإسلام وعموده الصلاة وذروة سنامه الجهاد. ثم قال ألا أخبرك بملاك ذلك كله؟ قلت بلى يا رسول الله. قال فأخذ بلسانه قال كف عليك هذا. فقلت يا نبي الله وإنا لمؤاخذون بما نتكلم به. فقال ثكلتك أمك يا معاذ. وهل يكب الناس في النار على وجوههم أو على مناخرهم إلا حصائد ألسنتهم؟ هذا حديث حسن صحيح. ويقال حدثنا ابن أبي عمر قال حدثنا عبد الله بن وهب عن أمر بن حارث عن دراج أبي السمح عن أبي الهيثم عن أبي سعيد رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا رأيتم الرجل يتعاهد المسجد فاشهدوا له بالإيمان، فإن الله يقول إنما يعمر مساجد الله من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة. الآية. هذا حديث حسن غريب.
So over here, he talks about the حرمة الصلاة. He talks about حرمة الصلاة, the status of Salah in Islam, essentially, right? And so he asks, you have Mu'adh radiallahu anhu asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about something that will enter him into Jannah and distance him from the hellfire. And that's That is the goal of every believer. And so he mentions the 5 pillars essentially. And then he mentions other forms of good. ألا أدلك على أبواب الخير. He goes beyond. He doesn't just answer the question, but he doesn't just simply tell him the basics, but he tells him other forms of doing good, and some of the main forms of doing good and their benefits. That Sawm is a shield; it protects you from sin, and Sadaqah is a way of expiating one's sins. That it removes sins just as water puts out fire. And then Salatul Rajuli fi jawfil layl. And so this is the right, Salatul Rajuli fi jawfil layl, the importance of praying tahajjud, and then he quotes the ayat تتجافى جنوبهم عن المضاجع. And so you have, then he mentions ألا أخبرك برأس الأمر كله وعموده, the peak, the most important of matters, and its foundation. It's amud literally means pillar, the most foundational thing. So Ra'sul Amr, the most important matter, the foundation, and then the peak, Dirwatu Sanamihi. Dirwa is the peak. Sanam literally means hump, right? Like the hump of a camel, right? So the core, right? The core of the matter, Ra'sul Amr, is Islam. The foundation of Islam is Salah. So this is the point of this. This is why this hadith comes in this chapter. وَعَمُودُهُ as-salah. It's the pillar, meaning your faith is built on that. Right? This is the most fundamental act of worship. وَذِرْوَةُ سَنَامِهِ al-jihad, and its peak is jihad. Right? Jihad is the means of preserving the ability to practice the religion, preserving the ability to spread Islam and whatnot. And so that's why it's described in this way as the peak. Footnote. Let's read this footnote over here from قوت المغتدي. رأس الأمر الإسلام. He says, قالت التربشتي أراد بالأمر هنا أمر الدين وبالإسلام كلمتي الشهادة، يعني ما لم تقر العبد بهما لم يكن له من الدين شيء أصلا. So when it says رأس الأمر, it means that is, until that's there, he doesn't have any faith. وإذا أقر بهما حصل له أصل الدين، إلا أنه ليس له قوة وكمال كالبيت الذي ليس له عمود. فإذا صلى وداوم على الصلاة قوي دينه، ولكنه لم يكن له رفعة وكمال، فإذا جاهد حصل لدينه الرفعة. And so the salah fortifies one's faith. The jihad is the means of elevating the religion and giving it that strength. قال الحليمي يعني هذا والله أعلم أن الإسلام هو الذي لا يصح شيء من الأعمال إلا به، فإذا فات لم يبقى معه عمل، فهو كالرأس الذي لا يسلم شيء من الأعضاء إلا ببقائه، فإذا فارق جسده لم ينتفع بعده شيء من الأعضاء. وأما الصلاة فإنها عمود الأمر، والأمر هو الدين، لأن الإسلام لا ينفع ولا يثبت من غير الصلاة، ولا يغني ولا يغني قبولها ولا يغني قبولها عن فعلها لأن الإسلام وحده لا يحقن الدم حتى يكون معه إقامة الصلاة. Salah is the foundation, right? You have the hadith that come about differentiating. The thing that differentiates between a believer and a disbeliever is salah. And so, to the point that the punishments that are mentioned in the books of fiqh for tariq salah are extremely severe. They'd be imprisoned, they would be punished, etc. And so, وما قوله ذروة سنامه الجهاد فقيل معناه لا شيء من معالم الإسلام أشهر ولا أظهر منه فهو كذروة السنام التي لا شيء في البعيد أعلى منه وعليه يقع بصر الناظر من بعد. So it's called the peak of it's called the peak ذروة السنام because it is the most prominent aspect of Islam. And so this is the key part of this hadith that makes it relevant to this chapter. This title, Hurmatul Salah, that this is something that is fundamental to the religion, which makes it sacred. ثم قال ألا أخبرك بما ملاك ذلك كله. Milak, as he mentions in the footnote over here, ملاك الأمر قوامه وما يتم به. وقال البيضاوي أصله ومبناه, the foundation, the foundation of all of that, what that all is built upon and what is completed with. قلت بلى يا رسول الله, of course, O Messenger of Allah. قال فأخذ بلسانه, he said كف عليك هذا كف عليك هذا, that, control this, stop, control this, stop this. فقلت يا نبي الله وإنا لمؤاخذون بما نتكلم, are we going to be held accountable for what we say? And ثكلتك أمك يا معاذ, this is a phrase in Arabic he mentions over here. هذا دعاء عليه بالموت على ظاهره لا يراد ولا يراد وقوعه بل هو تأديب وتنبيه من الغفلة والتعجيب للأمر. Right, so this is literally, it means may your mother be bereft of you, may your mother bereave your loss, basically may you die. Right, that's a literal meaning, but it's metaphorical for tanbih. وهل يكب الناس على وجوههم, to will people be thrown on their faces, in basically thrown face first, head first in the fire. على وجوههم أو على مناخرهم, this is their noses. إلا حصاد ألسنهم, except due to the harvest of their tongues, due to what they've done with their tongues, that this would going to be one of the leading causes of people going to the hellfire. Any questions on that, please? Okay, we read the next. Right, this is also related to this next hadith that shows that salah is a manifestation of someone's faith. That salah, valuing salah, that is a manifestation of someone's faith, which makes it relevant to Abwab al-Iman, and trying to perfect the salah and doing all the necessary sunan and sunan of salah, such as going to the masjid, which is some scholars go to the extent of saying it's wajib, others say it's sunnah mu'akkada, qaribun min al-wajib, but it's one of the highest ranking sunnahs. It's a sunnah mu'akkada, which is almost at the level of wajib. And so this is something that is going to the masjid is something that is indicative of someone's faith. If someone frequents the masjid, it is a sign that they have their faith is in Allah is strong. And so that's why it says that فَاشْهَدُوا لَهُ بِالْإِيمَانِ, testify to his faith. Then he quotes the ayah of the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَى الزَّكَاةَ. Right? And so doing Umrah of the masajid, this doesn't mean is building the masajid, but this means frequenting the masjid and building it in terms of the environment, the people that are there, etc. Right. So over here, بابتنائها وترتيبها أو إحيائها بالعبادة والتدريس. Right, bringing it back to life. And so oftentimes this aspect is overlooked.
That makes sense. Every time I read the ayah, the translation that they built in a lot of translations.
And that's part of it, right? That's part of it, but that's not the key part of it. Right? You look at the Prophet ﷺ, what he prioritized, right? When building the masjid. Was it building that environment and bringing it back to life, or was it the physical building, right? It expanded over time due to the needs of the community, but the primary goal was building that environment and bringing that sense of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala back to life over there. Right. So it's both aspects. Both aspects are there. It doesn't just mean one or the other, but it has, right? Al-ibratu bi'umum lafz. Right? It's left generic so that it can include both aspects. Zainab, you want to read the next chapter?
قال باب ما جاء في ترك الصلاة. وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا جرير وأبو معاوية عن الأعمش عن أبي سفيان عن جابر رضي الله عنه وعنهم أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال بين الكفر والإيمان ترك الصلاة.
Read the entire chapter.
وبه قال حدثنا هناد قال حدثنا أسباط بن محمد عن الأعمش بهذا الإسناد نحوه قال بين العبد وبين الشرك أو الكفر ترك الصلاة. هذا
over here this would be the O would be for shak أو قال الكفر.
أو قال الكفر ترك الصلاة. هذا حديث حسن صحيح. وأبو سفيان اسمه طلحة بن نافع.
So do you understand why I said the O would be for shak over here, even though it's not explicitly mentioned? So the idea is that when you have two similar words coming before and after O, which are almost interchangeable, then O is most likely going to be for shirk. So over here, shirk and kufr are being used synonymously, and you have certain narrations that have shirk, certain narrations that mention kufr, right? Because it's essentially referring to the same thing. And so the narrator, when it has O over here, it means that the narrator is not sure which one was mentioned. But because the confusion was because they were the words are so similar. So when you have O and it's followed by two things that are almost synonymous, then it would generally be for shak.
Sheikh, is it the same for the previous chapter as well? It says على وجوههم أو على مناخرهم.
Most likely, right? Let's see. Right? Yeah, we mentioned it explicitly in the footnote, right? Shakku min al-rawi. So we missed that. We should have read it. أو قال على مناخرهم. But it's referring essentially to the same thing, right? even though it's not explicitly mentioned, right? Wujuh and manaqib. The nose is part of the face. And so that's another example. Jazakallah khair.
وبه قال حدثنا هناد قال حدثنا وكيع عن سفيان عن أبي الزبير عن جابر رضي الله عنه وعنهم قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين العبد وبين الكفر ترك الصلاة. هذا حديث حسن صحيح. وأبو الزبير اسمه محمد بن مسلم بن تدرس. وبه قال حدثنا
تدرس over here is غير منصرف. Why?
It's the pattern that it's on.
Yeah. وزن الفعل, right? عالميا وزن الفعل. تدرس, you have يزيد, different words, right? So this is it's for that reason. Good. Continue.
وبه قال حدثنا أبو عمار الحسين بن حريث ويوسف بن عيسى قال حدثنا الفضل بن موسى عن الحسين بن واقد وحدثنا أبو عمار قال وحدثنا أبو عمار ومحمود بن غيلان قال حدثنا علي بن الحسين بن واقد عن أبيه وقال حدثنا محمد بن
So you're going to say حا قال وحدثنا.
Okay. وقال حدثنا محمد بن علي بن الحسن الشقيقي ومحمود.
So you're going to say حا and then قال وحدثنا.
Okay. ومحمود بن.
So Imam Tirmidhi is saying, and Muhammad ibn Ali narrated to us. Right?
قال حدثنا علي بن الحسن بن شقيق عن الحسين بن واقد عن عبد الله بن بريدة عن أبيه رضي الله عنه وعنهم قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم العهد الذي بيننا وبينهم الصلاة فمن تركها فقد كفر. وفي الباب عن أنس وابن عباس رضي الله عنهم. هذا حديث حسن صحيح غريب. وبه قال حدثنا قتيبة قال حدثنا بشر بن المفضل عن الجريري عن عبد الله بن شقيق العقيلي قال كان أصحاب محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يرون شيئا من الأعمال تركه كفر غير الصلاة.
Okay, so in this, right, this is coming because of the importance of salah to one's faith, and the act of leaving salah is not an act of kufr in and of itself. Denying salah is an act which takes someone out of the fold of Islam, but leaving it is a major sin, and these are highlighting how severe of a sin it is. And so over here in this hadith, you have tahweed coming. And so, right, the idea is that he has multiple chains to the same narration, to the same matan. And so he just wants, instead of listing each one separately, they all join at a certain point. And so he wants to consolidate, he uses tahweed. So you have over here عن الحسين ibn واقد, right? The first, and then you have the first comes. You go back, and then you have Ali ibn Husayn al-Waqid عن أبيه, which is Husayn al-Waqid. So both of those chains join at Husayn al-Waqid. And then you have over here, continue, and then you say Husayn ibn Waqid. So essentially what he's doing is he's bringing three chains which all converge at Husayn ibn Waqid, and then from Husayn ibn Waqid onwards, it's the same chain. And so that's why he's bringing the Ha'u Tahweed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Ha'u Tahweed can be used in different ways. Sometimes it's the it's going to be like this, where the chains are converging at one point, and sometimes it'll be used differently as well. So this is one of the usages of it. And with that, we will stop for today. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.